In my own journey with brain injury, I would find myself pushing so hard that I ended up in these cycles of burnout, overwhelm, and exhaustion. So today we are talking about learning to set healthy boundaries in brain injury recovery and how do we care for ourselves and others and finding the right support in this month's theme, care, support, and boundaries. We also have a great podcast spotlight from Dr. Jeremy Schmoe all about the ways that boundaries help our brains in recovery. There is always hope, and you are not alone. Hi, I'm Cristabelle Braden, and this is my brain injury podcast, Hope Survives. This is an uplifting podcast to bring hope to your darkest days. As a survivor of traumatic brain injury and multiple concussions and re-injuries, I know what it's like to struggle to find hope. I don't want anyone to feel as alone as I did, and that's why over 10 years ago, I started an online community called Hope After Head Injury, which has now launched into a nonprofit organization called Hope Survives. Hope Survives envisions a world in which every survivor of brain injury and every member of their family are seen, loved, heard, valued, supported, uplifted, and never alone. This podcast is an extension of that, and I'd love to invite you to join along as we explore the realities of life with brain injury, with messages of encouragement, interviews with doctors and professionals, and survivor and family stories. No matter where you're at on your journey, there is always hope. With a little hope, you can make it through today. With a little faith, someday you'll get through the pain. Just a little love is enough to light the way through your darkest night. Hope survives. A little faith, a little love. Hope survives. Hey friends, welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. Today we are talking all about care, support, and boundaries in brain injury recovery. As you may know, if you've been listening to the podcast over the last number of months, at Hope Survives, we've been choosing themes for each month. And this theme is care, support, and boundaries. Today, we have a really great spotlight with Dr. Jeremy Schmoe that'll come in just a little bit. We also have another community panel coming out later this month on boundaries in brain injury recovery. And I'm so excited to dive into this topic because this is something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but that's very important to be able to set some guardrails for our recovery. So, as I was working on our newsletter for this month, which if you're not subscribed yet, visit hopesurvives.org, get subscribed right there on the homepage. We have a monthly newsletter called the Hope Journal, which you can also download at our resource hub. I write a letter every month on our theme. And as I was working on this month's letter, I found myself procrastinating and putting it off a little bit too much because there was so much I wanted to say, but I didn't really know how to put it together. So when I finally sat down to think about what does care, support, and boundaries mean to me, I was just reminded of how I would constantly have these recurring thoughts in my brain injury journey. Things like, I'm so overwhelmed. This feels like too much. Why am I still so tired? I wish I felt better. My body and my brain feels weird, but I'll try to push through. Have you ever felt this way? Living with brain injury is a lot. And over the years, I found myself thinking a lot of forms of these thoughts over and over again. And it can be so hard to get yourself out of those thought loops, especially when you're so overwhelmed by symptoms and other things. And because my personal journey with brain injury has involved a lot of setbacks and re-injuries through the years, the more time that passed, the harder on myself that I was becoming. And I remember coming to what would really become like a breaking point where I felt so strongly that I just had to push myself forward because, frankly, I was so tired of being tired. Can you feel that? I'm just tired of having symptoms, tired of dealing with it all, just wishing that it would all go away, and frustrated by still being brain injured. I kept myself in these push and pull cycles where I would try and push myself through and think, okay, well, if I can just do one more thing or just a little bit more, or maybe I'll feel better tomorrow. I would push myself so hard. And while this was in some ways what I thought was making me more productive, it actually, I kept pushing myself beyond my capacity and it actually led to more exhaustion. And it kept me in these never ending cycles of burnout. And when I thought about what that looked like, it's like I would find myself pushing through, but then my brain would crash and I would have to do this forced rest. And then from the resting that I was forced to do from the crash, I would start to feel a little bit more okay, but not truly healing. And then I'd be back to pushing through. So it's this cycle of push through, brain crash, forced rest, start to feel a little bit okay, back to pushing through. And for years, I was in these cycles without even realizing it. The breakthrough for me came when I realized that I couldn't keep living like this because I was feeling worse and not better. And it was absolutely horrible for my mental and my spiritual health. And most of all, I definitely couldn't keep doing what I felt called to do with Hope After Head Injury, Hope Survives podcast, this podcast, and stepping forward into founding a nonprofit if something didn't change. You might know I first started online support through Hope After Head Injury in 2012. And for a long time, I had wanted to turn it into a nonprofit. But I knew that if I pushed myself to do that, I didn't want that to burn out because there would be a lot more at stake than just me. If you've been listening to this podcast since it first came out, or if you've gone back and listened to old episodes, you might hear me being a little hard on myself in some of the episodes because I had set an unattainable schedule of podcast release. I kept trying to think I should get a podcast out every week. And at the time, it took me many, many, many hours to edit the episodes. And it was just a lot. It was a lot. And I kept not achieving what I wanted to achieve. And I kept feeling like I was failing. And I would take breaks from putting episodes out, sometimes unintentionally. That forced rest that I mentioned in the cycles, yeah, that would even happen with this, with the podcast and with things. I would push myself and then I would get to a place where I just couldn't do it. And I was in this crash survival mode. So I learned the hard way that I had to learn how to take breaks and that I had to get myself in a healthier space and get out of those cycles. And I chose to wait to move forward with Hope Survives as a nonprofit until I knew that I was in a healthy enough place to not burn out. I waited until I was able to ask for help and support from a team. So I spent years getting the Hope Survives founding team together. Some of the board of directors I asked to join 2 full years before we actually filed the paperwork. It was a very long process, and eventually our team formed, including Jasmine, and it has been such an incredible journey to see Hope Survives take off in the last year with help from a team, right? Because I can't do it all on my own. I absolutely cannot. And I also needed to be in a healthier place to be able to have the sustainable growth that Hope Survives needed. And so I also had to learn how to identify the care that my brain needs. And the last thing that I wanted to do was start something out of my own strength that was just going to burn out, because honestly, that was my pattern. Push, pull, burn out. Sometimes I'd get re-injuries when I was pushing myself too hard. Sometimes they were just accidents like falling down the stairs, things you can't predict. But I realized I needed care, support, and boundaries. And for me, these three concepts are really intertwined. And so this month here at Hope Survives, month of September, we're going to be diving into care, support, and boundaries. Over the last few months, we explored the concepts of brain health and social communication. And both of these were pivotal parts in my journey because understanding brain health and what my healing brain actually needed made all the difference in moving forward in my recovery. And identifying my challenges with social communication helped me to learn how to better connect with others, maintain relationships, and most of all, advocate for my needs. So now we're going to take these concepts we've been exploring on the podcast in the last number of months. We talked about social communication, we talked about brain health, we also talked about resilience, identity, and grief and ambiguous loss. And when we can kind of pull that together, realize what we need on a level of mental health, emotional health, physical health, spiritual health, we can apply them to the next layer, which is learning to care for ourselves and others, identifying our support needs and what true support feels like, and setting healthy boundaries that become guardrails for recovery. The truth is, we all need some form of boundaries, both with ourselves and within relationships. But if you don't know what your needs are, it will be harder to know what your boundaries should be. And you may end up in those cycles of burnout like I experienced. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into the concept of boundaries and healthy boundaries because so many people think of boundaries as a bad thing or as walls or as something difficult. But I would love to approach this from a gentler perspective. You remember a couple months ago, and if you haven't listened to the episode, I put out an episode talking about brain health rhythms and going from survival mode to gentle healing. And we talked about how important it is to approach your brain health and these rhythms with gentleness, with grace, and that is how we can approach our boundaries as well. So I would love to transition next into our spotlight with Dr. Jeremy Schmoe, where he's going to dive deeper into why boundaries are important for our brains and some sample healthy boundaries that you could set for yourself. After the spotlight with Dr. Schmoe, we'll come back and I'm going to share a bit more about boundaries and the importance of care, support, and boundaries together. We would love to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Functional Neurology Center. Their personalized neuro recovery programs offer hope to those suffering from brain injuries, dysautonomia, vestibular, chronic pain, stroke, movement dysfunction, developmental disorders, PPPD, FND, and complex post-concussion. Thank you to the Functional Neurology Center and Dr. Jeremy Schmoe for your generous support of Hope Survives and this podcast. So we'd love to go into our podcast spotlight moment with Dr. Jeremy Schmoe. I know you're going to learn a lot from this. Hey, Dr. Schmoe, we are talking all about boundaries in brain injury recovery, whether it's boundaries with yourself and how do you take care of what your brain needs, or boundaries with other people and how do you communicate those needs. So what are your thoughts on how people can implement these boundaries as they are going through their recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see this with patients all the time because, pre-injury, you're at this other state of function and you might not have had problems with, reading or scrolling on your phone or neurological fatigue, but now you do. And in terms of trying to do all the activities that you were able to do before, one of the things that I see is that people they try and pack in as much stuff that they can do over a short period of time when their neurological system is like doing well, and then they just crash afterwards. So it's like trying to get so much stuff done because you know that you have this dysfunction in the way that your brain energy is able to function. And you go, all right, I got 1 hour a day, and boom, you just hammer out all your stuff. And then it turns into this cycle of you're doing that every single day, and then you do and you crash, you do and you crash, and you do and you crash, where if you had strategies to combat neurological fatigue, then you could pace yourself more effectively, and you maybe do things for 10, 15 minutes and then try not to like rush through and get everything done, and then go into that cycle of continuous, you're on the merry-go-round of trying to do everything that you need to do in like 1 hour a day when your brain is good, and then your system fatigues. So that's one of the biggest things that I see with patients. So that's definitely huge. And then other people just don't really understand what you're going through. So they might not understand that having a conversation with them for 20 minutes could crash you for the rest of the day. Even though you like that person, you like what they're saying, everything's good. Maybe they're your best friend. They want to go out to lunch with you or do this. And that's why I think, doing what we're doing here is such a great thing, because then you can send these to people and your friends and your family to help them understand what neurological fatigue is. I think it all comes down to education. So it's having good educational information to share with your friends, to let them know what you're going through when you might not be able to verbalize what you're going through or explain it. And I know it's hard for patients because, you might get mad at your loved one, or, you might, they might perceive you as just being anxious, or being like really jittery or something like that, but really it's your nervous system that's doing it. And if we could educate them on why that's happening, maybe you won't get pushed as much by them to do something or try and push through, or this or that. So I do think it's definitely 100% education, and that's why Hope Survives is here to get people all that information.
Thank you, Dr. Schmoe. And we're so glad to have you
Yeah.
part of Hope Survives. And we're so grateful for your contributions. Another question on boundaries. So many people know they need to set boundaries, but they don't know how to do it. What are some sample boundaries that you would suggest for anyone going through post concussion and brain injury?
Mhm. Yeah. So, idea sample boundaries would be actually really writing out your schedule of what you're going to do during the day, like what your schedule needs to look like, your optimal schedule to prevent full neurological fatigability in your system crashing and then getting back on the merry-go-round, and then sharing that with your loved ones, and then having a written explanation of why. It's not like, oh, I can't go to the grocery store with you, or I don't want to go to the grocery store. It's that when I do this, it causes visual overstimulation and too much this, and it's going to cause me to feel that way. And if people know that, and we can verbalize that, communicate that, then they'll probably have a better understanding. So I would say definitely having that schedule written out and trying to like look at your week in terms of where you're at that certain time in your recovery, to develop, hey, this is, I'm here right now. My neurological fatigability is, I'm doing pretty good. So this week, I think that I'm able to do this and that and that and that and that. We'll see where we're at, but that's where I think that I'm at right now. So I do think we got to write things down if that's possible, or use AI to develop a plan, or something of that nature.
When you shared with us about brain health, you talked about screen time and diet and nutrition and things like
Mhm.
that. So, what are some sample boundaries people could set for themselves on how to take care of their brain better?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, in terms of screen time, visual overstimulation, I would say that most people, just in general, in terms of just your everyday person, I mean, we should not be doing, more than 30 minutes at a time being on a screen, or like, I might be fatigued just from us like doing this and talking for 30 minutes. Like, it's not normal to 100% stare, look at the screen, scroll, do all these movements for more than 30 minutes, in my opinion. So it's whatever fatigability that you have, it's taking that, subtracting it, and doing, say, 5 minutes less. So you don't actually get to that point of crashing every single time. So, say if you feel really fatigued at 20 minutes, then, your threshold would be 15, and then you push it to that 15. And then if you're doing good, then you take a break. You do some neurological exercises like some body movement or some activation to cancel out the visual overstimulation and bump up your proprioception. So I just think in that factor of vision, vestibular, proprioception, and then what do we need to do to kind of balance out the type of stimulation that we're getting. So it doesn't mean that you just crawl up, go in a hole and don't do anything. Sometimes you just got to balance your system out and like up something else. So you do 15 minutes, you do 5 minutes of some sort of complex leg movement. Boom, you can actually get right back in and start doing some of the visual stimulation again. So I think it's just taking targeted breaks, and you got to start off with like writing this stuff down and like basically helping you remember what you need to do, and then eventually it turns into lifestyle, and then eventually it disappears, and you're like, oh wow, I don't have to do the leg movement again. I don't have to think about breathing. It just becomes automatic again, and that's what happens with these injuries is everything becomes so it's not reflexive anymore. You gotta think, you gotta do way too much just to function on normal things that you used to do where you never even had to think about them. But that's what happens with TBI is it makes it so things aren't as reflexive. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schmoe, for sharing those boundaries with us. I think it's so important, especially the screen time one. Man, I honestly still struggle with that a lot. And I think it's important for us to understand he talked a lot about the neurology of it. I don't understand things, obviously, to the level of Dr. Schmoe. But what I do know is that social media was created to be addictive. Tech companies literally have psychologists working for them that try to figure out ways to make your phone as addictive as possible. This is for everybody, whether you have a brain injury or not. Your phone is not trying to help you. Social media is not there to help your brain. It is making it so much worse. And I find myself in the endless scroll that doesn't stop. And suddenly time has passed and I'm overwhelmed and I'm overstimulated. And man, that just does something to me. And while there's, yeah, sometimes great things on social media, especially if you follow Hope Survives, wink, wink, we do try to post some things, but we have to set ourselves some boundaries around social media and around screen time if we want our brains to recover. And the question that I have to ask myself is, how serious am I about my brain recovering? How serious am I? Do I want my brain to heal? If the answer is yes, why am I sitting on social media every day, literally what they call brain rot, right? Like, why am I allowing myself to do things that are actually detrimental and bad for my brain, objectively bad for my brain? So, when it comes to these gentle brain health rhythms, and again, if you haven't gone back and listened to the brain health episodes, highly recommend them because you will learn a lot of strategies and tips of ways that you can learn that what your brain might need for healing, and just some general information, specific information about things that generally are good for your brain. So I want to ask myself every day, what can I do that can help my brain to be in the best environment for it to heal? Something I learned the hard way is that setting healthy guardrails for my recovery, it can come with grace. It doesn't have to feel restrictive, and we can pivot as we go at our own pace. So there might be some weeks where I am finding myself on social media a lot more and I need to set a screen time. I have an iPhone, so Apple has a screen time limit. You can also download apps that do this, and I need to set that for myself and I need to make it strict, right? But then there are other times that maybe I'm not struggling with it as much, or I want to intentionally watch things on social media, like maybe a brain injury account, hint, hint, Hope Survives, like I said earlier. But maybe I want to go on there for a purpose and I'm doing it for a reason. And so maybe I don't need those really intense boundaries. Maybe I can allow myself a little more grace, right? Or if I want to watch like a video or a movie, or I'm choosing screen time intentionally, we can choose that. So, setting those boundaries, another area that we talked about is nutrition, right? I set boundaries for myself in nutrition. However, that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy food at times, or if I want ice cream in the summer, I just have to be smart about the way that I do it. So I can't obviously have it every day like someone without a brain injury could. But if I do choose to have some sugar, I always make sure to combine it with good protein and fiber that day. I try to get protein and fiber every day, but I make sure to combine it intentionally with that and just know if I have ice cream one night, the next day I'm probably going to have a headache. So maybe the boundary looks for myself if I have ice cream, I only do it if I don't have something important to do the next morning. And it can feel like a lot to think about, but these small little steps that you can take can make a big difference in your recovery. It's important to recognize that our care and support needs might shift season to season. As your brain is healing, your limits and needs will naturally have to be adjusted, or maybe you have a setback and your limits and needs will be adjusted for that. So keep that awareness as you start to practice your own boundaries. Now, I've shared that I have, yes, improved significantly in this area. I am still learning. There's no such thing as being perfect with this. And honestly, if you try for perfection, you will likely end up disappointed. I still have my hard days and my hard weeks. And sometimes I do still have that tendency to push myself or to take on too much beyond my capacity. Especially with Hope Survives this year, as we launched in March, I had a big burnout after that. I had pushed myself way too far. And while it was for a good cause, it really caused me to have to struggle with my brain injury symptoms because I had pushed myself beyond what my limits actually were. Even though, right, it was for a good reason, maybe I could have done some things in a different way or prioritized things differently. So I'm learning, I'm adjusting, I'm trying little by little. So having the support of being able to connect with others that understand can make a huge difference. Our support groups at Hope Survives are here exactly for this reason. We have support groups with all sorts of different specialties. There's Hope After Head Injury, that's specifically for those who have sustained brain injuries. We talk about what we're going through, symptoms, strategies, and hope in life with brain injury. There's also a Hope for Family group, which is specifically for those who are family members or loved ones of the brain injury survivor. We ask the person who sustains the brain injury to not attend the family group. It's specifically for family members. We also have Hope for Couples, which couples can come individually or together, but it is for couples that are navigating brain injury. We had the Hope for Couples episode, just the last episode with Tamika and Rob, where they talked about communication in brain injury and their marriages and how they were affected by brain injury, because that's a really real thing. And so couples coming together to give each other advice and encouragement, that's honestly one of my favorite meetings of the month. We love it. We also have Found Connection, which is a group for brain injury survivors who don't have that built in support system and maybe don't have that family support that's there for them for whatever reason. And that group is there to offer support for those with the unique needs of maybe not having a caregiver in their life. We also have Renewed by Faith, which is our faith based brain injury support group. And we talk about how our relationship with God is affected by our brain injury and how we can encourage each other to keep hope in the Lord while we're going through these hard times. This month we actually just met and we talked about rest in brain injury in Matthew 11:28, where Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." We talked about what does it mean to find that rest in the Lord when we're feeling so overwhelmed, right? So there are all sorts of support groups that we have available. We're also continually running programs and just very grateful for those who are facilitating our workshops. It has just been really wonderful how much we've grown at Hope Survives, and we're already deep into planning for 2026 and beyond. So if you need support, we are here for you. We also want to encourage and empower you to find support systems in your life to communicate better with your family and friends, and to have sustainable relationships and growth in your life with brain injury. We're also, when we connect with others that are going through brain injury and who understand, also things like this podcast, right? I hope that listening helps you. And that's why you're here. And, our hope is that this podcast does provide some help and support for you. But having support with others who understand brain injury can help you to identify what kind of care needs that you might have. Maybe you never thought about wearing a ball cap to help with light sensitivity. I actually have my hat on now. This is one of our new Hope Survives hats that we do have available in our online store, which I'm just so thankful and excited about. But these are embroidered, and if you're watching the video on YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening, you can check it out on the website. But I love this hat because, first of all, it makes me happy to look at the brain heart logo. But second of all, I struggle with light sensitivity, and on days that I'm overwhelmed, I have to wear a hat. And it makes such a huge difference in how calm that my brain feels. It just eliminates just a little bit of that, right? And so maybe you've never thought about wearing a hat to help with your overstimulation. It's not even so much the brightness of the lights as much as, especially in public or in stores, I cannot survive without a hat in a grocery store or in Target or anything like that. Like, a hat is my lifesaver in stores. It helps me to get so much less overstimulated because it cuts off the top visual field. So maybe you've never thought about something like that, or earplugs or noise canceling headphones. There are some small things that you can learn from other people with brain injuries and strategies that help you identify what care needs you have. When you know what care needs you have, it can help you both with self-care, being able to care for yourself, and also being able to care for other people. When you take care of yourself and when your brain is functioning, you're better able to love the people in your life and to care for others. You're also could be better at communicating what needs you might have so that the people in your life can be there for you. And so all of us together, it's so important to learn how to set those healthy boundaries that help us take care of our brains, take care of ourselves, and honestly, healthy boundaries help guard our relationships. There are certain things that, I won't answer texts after a certain time of night. My friends know that. I have my do not disturb set on my phone, and on iMessage, it shows the other person and it says, this person has do not disturb set. They won't be notified. And I love being able to just put that on at times that I need to rest or focus, because then I'm not overwhelmed by notifications on my phone. My friends can still send me text, but I've set a boundary for myself that, I still want to hear from them, but I'm not going to answer it until a certain amount of time when my brain is ready to handle my phone. So there are little things like that we can do to be able to help ourselves to continue to heal, to continue to recover. Sometimes the boundary does have to look like not giving into peer pressure. Like, I have to refuse foods at certain places. And sometimes it's hard when they're like, well, I don't want to eat dessert if you're not, it feels weird. And it's like, I just say, it's just not good for my brain. They know I have a brain injury, and I just leave it at that, right? And so we're going to talk a lot more about boundaries over the next episode here in the podcast, as well as on our social media this month. But I just want to thank you for listening and being here, because honestly, I understand what it's like to push through on survival mode. And if you can relate, you're not alone. So I hope that you'll join us at Hope Survives as we take this next step together and explore care, support, and boundaries this month. Thank you for listening to Hope Survives podcast. If you need anything or you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave a comment on this episode. We would also love if you want to leave us a rating or review. I don't ask for that a lot, but it does help the podcast to be discovered by others. If you like it, we would love to hear that. Positive feedback as well. And if you have questions or thoughts on this, email us hi@hopesurvives.org, and we would love to stay connected. So as I mentioned, we have a number of workshops coming up. You can visit hopesurvives.org to find everything. And with all that, know that you are not alone. Bye, everyone. See you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in to Hope Survives podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, and would love for you to consider leaving us a rating or a review. Check out hopesurvives.org for more. We'll see you next time, and remember, there is always hope.